What would you do if your own brother called you broke in front of strangers while you were secretly sitting on $5 million? This is the story of how I watched my family beg for forgiveness after they discovered I owned the company they'd been desperately trying to impress for years. But the real shock, what I did with that money, will leave you speechless. The marble floors of First National gleamed under fluorescent lights as I pushed through the heavy glass doors. 23 years old, wearing my only decent blazer, clutching a withdrawal slip for $200. $200. That's all I needed to keep Elena's daughter in school. The lobby buzzed with afternoon banking traffic, customers in tailored suits clicking heels, quiet conversations about mortgages and investment portfolios. I walked toward the teller windows, my worn sneakers silent against the polished stone. Then I saw him, Mark, my older brother, branch manager, standing behind the customer service desk in his crisp navy suit, gold nameplate catching the light. He looked up, and for a split second, I thought I saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, maybe even surprise. But then his expression hardened. Looking for scraps again, his voice carried across the lobby, loud enough for everyone to hear. We don't do charity here. The conversation stopped. Heads turned. A woman in pearls glanced between us, her eyebrows raised. The security guard shifted his weight. Even the tellers paused their counting. I stood there, withdrawal slip trembling slightly in my hand, feeling 20 pairs of eyes burning into me. The same feeling I'd carried since childhood. The weight of being nothing in a room full of everything. Mark crossed his arms, waiting for me to leave, to shrink away like I always did. But something was different this time. I didn't move. Standing there in that moment, I was 8 years old again. Christmas morning, 1998. Mark unwrapping his new bicycle while I got socks. Clarice getting the bedroom with the bay window while I slept in the converted basement. Always the afterthought. Always the spare. Kara doesn't need much, Mom would say like it was a compliment. She's so independent. Independent. Code for invisible. By 16, Mark was handling Dad's construction accounts. Clarice managed the rental properties. And me, I was told college wasn't financially realistic for someone with my grades. Never mind that my grades were actually better. Never mind that I'd been accepted to Penn State with a partial scholarship. Mark convinced Mom the money should go toward expanding the business instead. Family legacy, he called it. 3 months later, he bought himself a brand new truck. But that was 15 years ago. Ancient history. Until this morning when Elena called me crying. Elena Martinez, my neighbor, my friend, the woman who brought me soup when I had the flu and never asked for anything in return. Her daughter, Sophia, had been accepted to Columbia University. Full ride except for a $2,000 housing deposit due by Friday. I tried everywhere, Elena had whispered into the phone. The banks, the credit unions. My credit is shot since the divorce. Sophia's going to lose her spot. $2,000. Might as well have been $2 million for a single mother working double shifts at the diner. I looked at my own bank balance. $237. Not enough to save anyone, but I knew where I could get more. Elena, I told her, give me 24 hours. So here I was in Mark's bank, asking for a simple withdrawal. $200 from my own account. Money I'd saved from my part-time job at the bookstore. Money that was mine. Mark stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for me. Account's been flagged for suspicious activity, he said, not even trying to hide his smirk. I can't authorize any withdrawals today. Suspicious activity on a savings account that hadn't moved in 6 months. This is ridiculous, Mark. Bank policy, he shrugged. Maybe try one of those payday loan places downtown. I hear they're very accommodating for people in your situation. The humiliation burned through me like acid. But this time, instead of that familiar shame, something else took root. Clarity. I folded the withdrawal slip, carefully tucked it into my purse, and walked toward the exit. Every step, deliberate. Every breath, measured. because Mark had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd forgotten who he was dealing with. My apartment was a studio above Mrs. Chen's bakery. 1,700 a month for 400 square feet, a Murphy bed, and the constant smell of sourdough. Most people would call it pathetic. I called it perfect camouflage. I climbed the narrow stairs, fishing my keys from my purse. The hallway was dim wallpaper peeling in places, but I preferred it that way. Invisible. Forgettable. Exactly what I needed to be. Inside, I kicked off my shoes and went straight to the small desk by the window. My laptop sat there, a battered Dell from 2019 that looked like it belonged in a garage sale. I pressed the power button and waited for the ancient machine to wheeze to life. First password, the date Dad died. Second password, Mom's maiden name backwards. Third password, a 37-character string that would take most people a lifetime to crack. The screen went black for a moment. Then slowly, an interface materialized. Clean, professional, minimal. Vault 1. In the top right corner, a single line of text that never failed to make my heart skip. Current liquidity, $5,212,000. 5.2 million. Hidden in shell companies and cryptocurrency wallets scattered across 14 countries. Built over 7 years of 18-hour days, coded in the silence of 3 a.m., while the rest of the world slept. Every penny earned through algorithms that could predict market fluctuations 60 seconds before they happened. I'd been 21 when I wrote the first line of code. Furious, brilliant, and completely invisible to everyone who mattered. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Encrypted, of course. Only one person had this contact method. The text appeared, package delivered to Zurich office. Client wants to expedite timeline. Is it time? Oliver, my business partner, though my family didn't know he existed. Hell, my family didn't know Vault 1 existed. For 4 years, Oliver had been managing our European operations from Switzerland, while I handled everything stateside from this tiny studio apartment. We'd never met in person, never even spoken on the phone. But Oliver understood me in ways my own family never had. He saw potential where others saw problems. He built bridges where others built walls. And right now he was asking the question I'd been avoiding for months. Is it time to stop hiding? Time to stop pretending to be small? Time to step out of the shadows and show my family exactly who they'd been underestimating? I stared at the message for a long moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. In the background, I could hear the muffled sounds of traffic, of people living their ordinary lives with their ordinary problems. But there was nothing ordinary about what I was considering. With 2 clicks, I could transfer enough money to not just save Sophia's college dreams, but to buy the entire university if I wanted to. With 3 clicks, I could make Mark's little bank branch look like a lemonade stand. With 4 clicks, I could change everything. My phone buzzed. A text from Elena. Any luck with the loan? Sophia's getting worried. I looked at her message, then at Oliver's question still waiting on my screen, then at the balance that represented 7 years of being invisible, underestimated, and forgotten. My fingers found the keys. Yes, I typed back to Oliver. It's time. Then I opened a new window and began transferring funds. Not $200, not $2,000. Something much more interesting. But before I made that transfer, I needed to remember why this mattered. Spring 2018. I was 21, fresh out of community college with a computer science degree that I'd paid for myself. Waitressing nights, tutoring kids on weekends, selling plasma twice a week. Whatever it took. I'd heard through Mom that Mark's bank was looking for a fintech intern. Someone to help modernize their digital systems. It was perfect. My degree, my skills, my chance to finally prove I belonged. I walked into that same marble lobby, wearing my one good dress, carrying a portfolio of projects I'd built in my spare time. Mobile banking apps, fraud detection algorithms, cryptocurrency wallets, stuff that was years ahead of what most banks were using. Mark kept me waiting 47 minutes. When he finally called me into his office, he didn't even look at my portfolio. Kara, sweetheart, he'd said, leaning back in his leather chair. I appreciate you coming in, but we need someone with real experience. This internship requires someone who can hit the ground running. But Mark, I built a trading algorithm that's been profitable for 6 months straight. I created a DC. Listen, his voice cut through mine like ice. Banking isn't about playing around with computers. It's about trust, relationships, things you can't just code your way through. He stood up, straightening his tie. The meeting was over. There's a Starbucks opening up on 5th Street, he added, walking me to the door. I could put in a good word if you're interested. Manager position, good benefits. Starbucks, after I'd just shown him software that could revolutionize their entire operation. That night, I sat in my studio apartment with my ancient laptop staring at the rejection email he'd sent an hour after I left. Professional, polite, brutal. While we appreciate your interest in the fintech internship position, we have decided to move forward with a candidate whose background more closely aligns with our current needs. The candidate they chose, Mark's golf buddy's son, a marketing major who couldn't code Hello World if his life depended on it. I cried for exactly 10 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and started building something that would make Mark's little internship program look like finger painting. Night after night, I coded. While the city slept, while my neighbors watched Netflix, while my family lived their lives without giving me a second thought. I built trading algorithms that could read market sentiment from social media, payment systems that processed transactions faster than anything the big banks were using, security protocols that made Fort Knox look like a screen door. 3 years later, Vault One was processing $50 million in transactions per quarter, and Mark still thought I worked at a bookstore. I blinked, bringing myself back to the present. My fingers were already moving across the keyboard, muscle memory taking over. The same fingers that had coded through 1,000 sleepless nights, that had built an empire while everyone else was building excuses. On my screen, the Vault One interface displayed a new window. Asset liquidation protocol. Confirmation required. Below that, a single button, initiate pull. This wasn't just about $200 anymore. This wasn't even about Elena or Sophia, though I'd make sure they were taken care of. This was about 7 years of being invisible. 7 years of watching Mark play king of a castle built on my father's foundation. 7 years of silence. My cursor hovered over the button. One click, and Mark's world would change forever. I thought about that 47-minute wait in the lobby, about his condescending smile, about the Starbucks suggestion. I clicked initiate pull. The screen flashed green. Liquidity transfer approved. Estimated completion 6:00 a.m. Eastern. In 12 hours, Mark was going to discover what happens when you underestimate the quiet girl in the corner, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. I slept better that night than I had in years. At 6:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a confirmation text from Vault One's automated system. Transfer complete. Asset liquidation successful. I made coffee, buttered toast, and waited. Mark always arrived at the bank by 7:30. Creature of habit. Same route, same parking spot, same routine he'd followed for 8 years. By 8 a.m., he'd be at his desk checking overnight reports and pretending to be important. Today was going to be different. I sipped my coffee and imagined him swiping his keycard, walking through those marble halls with his usual swagger, nodding at the tellers, checking his reflection in the chrome fixtures, settling into his corner office with its view of the parking lot. Then, he'd turn on his computer. At 8:23 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number, but I knew exactly who it was. Kara. Mark's voice was tight-strained. Hey, weird question, but did you do anything unusual with your account yesterday? I set down my coffee cup. Define unusual. Look, the system is showing some kind of error with your account. Like a big error. The computers are freaking out about some withdrawal that supposedly happened overnight, but the amounts are insane. It's obviously a glitch, but what kind of amounts, Hondirs? Silence. Then, the system thinks you withdrew $5.2 million, which is impossible, obviously, because you don't have $5.2 million. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Obviously, I said. Right. So, anyway, I just wanted to give you a heads up that we might need to freeze your account temporarily while IT sorts this out. Shouldn't take more than a few days. A few days? How generous? Sure, Mark. Whatever you need to do. I hung up and finished my coffee. Then I showered, dried my hair, and put on my favorite black coat. The one I'd bought myself for my birthday last year. Wool perfectly tailored, the kind of coat that made people take a second look. By 10:15, I was standing outside First National watching through the glass doors as chaos unfolded inside. Mark was pacing behind the customer service desk, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing wildly with his free hand. Three IT technicians hunched over computers, cables snaking across the marble floor. The branch manager stood nearby, arms crossed, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Customers wandered around in confusion, unable to access their accounts, while tellers apologized with practiced smiles. I walked through the front doors. The same security guard from yesterday nodded at me. The same pearl-wearing woman from yesterday stood in line, checking her watch impatiently. But today, everything felt different. Today, I wasn't invisible. I approached the customer service desk where Mark was still on the phone, his voice rising with each word. What do you mean you can't reverse it? It's obviously a system error. Nobody just withdraws $5 million from a savings account at 3 a.m. He looked up and saw me standing there. His face went pale. I'll call you back, he said into the phone. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Big brother and little sister, bank manager and customer, the successful one and the failure. Except today, the math was different. Hi, Mark, I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet lobby. I'd like to speak to the branch manager. Mark opened his mouth, closed. It opened it again. Behind him, one of the IT technicians looked up from his computer screen and whispered something to his colleague. Kara, listen about your account. The branch manager. I repeated louder this time. Is he available? The pearl-wearing woman turned to stare. The security guard straightened up. Even the tellers stopped counting their cash drawers. Mark's phone started ringing. He glanced at the caller ID and his face went from pale to gray. That's probably the CEO, I said helpfully. You should probably take that. His hand trembled as he answered the phone. Hello, Mr. Davidson. Yes, sir, we're still investigating the... What? No, sir, I don't know how... 5.2 million? Yes, sir, that's correct. He looked at me again, and I saw something new in his eyes. Recognition. Finally. Sir, he said into the phone, his voice barely above a whisper, I think I might know who made that withdrawal. Mark's conversation with the CEO lasted exactly 93 seconds. I counted. When he hung up, his hand was shaking so badly he nearly dropped the phone. The withdrawal? He said, his voice hollow. It came from a shell company called Vault One Financial. I nodded. That's correct. Vault One is... He swallowed hard. We've been trying to partner with them for 6 months. They're one of the biggest fintech companies in the Northeast. They process transactions for half the banks in New York. I know. Mark stared at me, and I could see his mind working, trying to connect dots that didn't make sense in his worldview. In Mark's world, important people wore expensive suits and drove German cars. Important people had corner offices and golf club memberships. Important people were not his little sister who lived above a bakery. The CEO wants to meet with whoever authorized that withdrawal, he continued. Vault One's been dodging our calls for months, but apparently they're willing to sit down if we can explain what happened to their money. Are they... Kara, this is serious. $5 million doesn't just disappear. If Vault One thinks we stole their money, they could destroy this bank. They could destroy me? I watched his face as the pieces slowly clicked into place. The sister who supposedly worked at a bookstore. The shell company that had been ignoring his partnership proposals. The timing of the withdrawal exactly 12 hours after he'd humiliated me in this very lobby. You know something, he said suddenly, about Vault One. That's why you're here. I know quite a bit about Vault One, actually. Do you work for them? Is that why you needed the money? Some kind of test or investigation. I almost felt sorry for him. Even now, even with all the evidence staring him in the face, He couldn't imagine that his failure of a sister could be anything more than someone else's employee. No, Mark, I said quietly. I don't work for Vault 1. Relief flooded his face. Okay, good. Because for a second there, I thought I built it. The words hung in the air like smoke. Mark's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Behind him, one of the IT technicians looked up sharply. The pearl-wearing woman leaned closer, pretending to read a brochure, but obviously listening. What? Vault 1 Financial. I built it. 7 years ago in my studio apartment on that laptop you thought was so pathetic. I wrote every line of code. I designed every algorithm. I created the company that you've been begging to notice you. Mark's face cycled through emotions like a broken traffic light. Confusion, disbelief, anger, fear. That's impossible. Is it? You've spent 6 months trying to get a meeting with Vault 1's leadership? How do you think that's been going? His silence was answer enough. Every proposal you've sent, every presentation you've prepared, every desperate email from your assistant asking for just 15 minutes of our time. I stepped closer. I've read them all, Mark. Every single one. No. He shook his head. No, you're lying. Vault 1 is worth hundreds of millions. You work at a bookstore. I volunteer at a bookstore, 1 morning a week reading to kids, because I can afford to spend my time however I want. The IT technician who'd been listening walked over, tablet in hand. Excuse me, he said hesitantly. Are you saying you're the Kara Meridian listed as Vault 1's primary stakeholder? Mark spun around. What? The account holder. The technician continued looking at his screen. Kara Elizabeth Meridian. The withdrawal authorization came directly from her. She owns 73% of Vault 1 Financial. I watched Mark's world crumble in real time. All those months of networking events and golf games, trying to make connections with people he thought mattered. All those years of treating me like I was nothing, like I was less than nothing. You, he whispered. I'm what Mark's successful, wealthy, important. I pulled out my phone and showed him my Vault 1 executive dashboard. I'm everything you've been pretending to be. His phone started ringing again. The CEO probably. Or maybe someone higher up the food chain wondering how a small-town bank had managed to piss off one of the most influential fintech companies on the East Coast. Mark didn't answer it. I don't understand, he said finally. If you have all this money, why did you come here yesterday for $200? Because I wanted to see if you'd changed. If maybe after all these years you'd finally see me as your sister instead of your charity case. And I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I got my answer. The IT technician handed Mark a printed report. His fingers trembled as he read the transaction details. Transfer authorization Vault 1 Financial to Meridian Educational Foundation. Amount $5,200,000. Status complete. Irreversible. Mark looked up from the paper, his face the color of old concrete. You moved all of it? Not all of it, I said calmly. I have other accounts. That wasn't entirely true, but Mark didn't need to know that. The psychological impact was more important than the mathematical accuracy. Kara listened to me. His voice cracked on my name. I can fix this. I can call the CEO back, explain that there was a misunderstanding. We can work something out. Can we? Yes, absolutely. Look, maybe yesterday, I wasn't as helpful as I should have been. But family is family, right? We stick together. Family. Now he wanted to talk about family. Mark, I said, do you know what the Meridian Educational Foundation does? He shook his head, still clutching the transfer report like it might change if he held it tight enough. It provides college scholarships for kids whose families can't afford tuition. Kids like Elena's daughter, Sophia. Kids like me 7 years ago when you convinced Mom that my education wasn't worth investing in. The color drained from his face completely. The foundation just received enough money to send 300 students to college. Full rides, 4 years each, thanks to the $5.2 million that you froze from my account yesterday. That money, Mark stammered. It wasn't supposed to. I mean, if I had known. If you had known what? That your broke little sister was actually successful. That the family failure was actually the family success story. Mark's phone rang again. This time he answered it without looking at the caller ID. Hello, yes, Mr. Davidson, she's here. Yes, sir, the account holder. Her name is Kara Meridian, and she's. His voice dropped to a whisper. She's my sister. I could hear the CEO's voice through the phone, sharp and demanding. Mark's face went from white to green. Sir, I understand the gravity of the situation. Yes, Sir Vault One has been one of our target partnerships. No, sir, I had no idea that. He looked at me, desperation creeping into his eyes. Mr. Davidson wants to know if there's any way to resolve this situation. If Vault One would consider maintaining a relationship with First National, despite the irregularities. I held out my hand for the phone. Mark hesitated, then passed it over. Mr. Davidson, this is Kara Meridian. I understand you've been trying to reach Vault One's leadership for several months. Ms. Meridian, I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience. If there's been some kind of misunderstanding with your account, I assure you we'll make it right immediately. There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Davidson. Your branch manager made it very clear yesterday that First National doesn't do business with people like me. I'm simply taking my business elsewhere. Silence on the other end of the line. However, I continued, I am willing to discuss a potential partnership between Vault One and First National. Would tomorrow morning work for a meeting? Yes, absolutely. What time would be convenient for you? 9 a.m. And Mr. Davidson, I'll need you to handle this personally. Your branch manager won't be involved in these negotiations. I ended the call and handed the phone back to Mark. He stared at it like it was a live grenade. What does that mean? He asked. Not involved, hoos. Instead of answering, I pulled out my own phone and opened the Vault One executive app. With a few taps, I accessed the partnership evaluation database. Let's see, I said, scrolling through the files. First National Bank Pittsburgh branch. Application submitted 6 months ago for processing partnership. Status, under review. I looked up at Mark. Would you like to know what my review says? His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Branch management demonstrates poor judgment and unprofessional conduct. Recommend declining partnership due to reputational risk. Mark's legs seemed to give out from under him. He sank to his knees right there on the marble floor in front of the tellers, the customers, the IT technicians, everyone. Kara, he whispered, please don't. Don't what, Mark? Don't let your actions have consequences. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You called me broke, I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent lobby. You called me broke when I was sitting on more money than this entire bank sees in a year. You humiliated me in front of strangers because you thought I was powerless. Mark was still on his knees looking up at me with tears in his eyes. But here's the thing you never understood, I continued. I wasn't powerless. I owned you for years. Every business loan this branch approved, every major transaction, every partnership deal. It all went through financial systems that I built. I've been watching you play king of the castle, not realizing that I owned the entire kingdom. Please, he whispered. I looked down at my big brother kneeling on the floor where he'd made me feel small countless times before. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I'd never experienced with my family. Pity. I helped Mark to his feet, not out of kindness, but because watching him grovel on the bank floor was drawing too much attention. The last thing I needed was someone posting a video on social media. Get up, I said quietly. You're embarrassing yourself. He stood on shaky legs, straightening his tie with trembling fingers. The confidence he'd worn like armor for 34 years had cracked and fallen away, leaving behind something smaller, and more fragile than I'd ever seen. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you figure out how to explain to your CEO why Vault One just pulled their business and why your biggest potential partnership just evaporated." "But you said you'd meet with Davidson tomorrow." "I said I'd discuss a partnership. I didn't say it would be with you." Mark opened his mouth to respond, but my phone started ringing. The caller ID made my stomach tighten. Clarice. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. Same number, and again. On the fourth call, I answered. "Clarice, we need to talk." No greeting, no pleasantries. Classic Clarice getting straight to business. Mark called me. He's saying some pretty wild things about you and some company called Vault One. Something about millions of dollars. I walked away from Mark toward the windows overlooking the parking lot. Mark says a lot of things. Cut the crap, Kara. Is it true? Do you have money? The directness shouldn't have surprised me. Clarice had never been one for subtlety. When we were kids, she demanded my Halloween candy with the same blunt efficiency she was using now. I have some money, yes. How much? Enough. Enough for what enough to help family. Because in case you've forgotten, Dad's medical bills wiped out most of the estate. Mom's barely scraping by on Social Security. And here you are, apparently sitting on a fortune while your family struggles. I almost laughed. Almost. My family struggles. Yes, your family. You know, the people who raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head. The same people who told me college wasn't realistic. The same people who gave my scholarship money to Mark. The same family that forgot to invite me to Christmas dinner last year. Silence on the other end. That was a misunderstanding, Clarice said finally. Was it because Mom posted plenty of pictures on Facebook? The whole family gathered around the tree. Everyone except me. If you had money, you should have said something. You would have what treated me differently. Like I mattered. My phone buzzed with another incoming call. Mom. I have another call, Clarice. Don't you dare hang up on me. We're family, and family takes care of each other. You're right, I said. Family should take care of each other. Where was that philosophy when I was sleeping in the basement? Where was it when I was working 3 jobs to pay for community college? I ended the call and declined Mom's call, sending it straight to voicemail. 2 minutes later, my phone chimed with a voicemail notification. I put it on speaker. Hi, sweetheart. Mom's voice was honey sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I was just thinking about you, and I realized it's been too long since we had a nice family dinner. Why don't you come over this Sunday? I'll make your favorite pot roast. We can catch up, maybe talk about some family matters that have come up. Love you, baby. Family matters. Right. I deleted the voicemail and opened my contacts, scrolling until I found Carmen Rodriguez, my executive assistant, the one person who knew how to handle logistics without asking questions. I sent her a text. Need dinner arranged for Sunday evening. Private dining room at the Carlton. 8 people maximum. Formal setting. Bill to Vault One corporate account. Her response came back in 30 seconds. How many will actually attend? I smiled despite myself. Carmen knew my family better than they knew themselves. Probably 5, I texted back, but prepare for 8 just in case. My phone started ringing again. This time it was Mark calling from the bank's landline. I answered. What, Mark? Clarice called me back. She's pretty upset. I'm sure she is. Look, I know things have been complicated between all of us, but maybe we could all sit down and talk this through. Like adults, like family. Funny you should mention that, I said, watching him through the bank windows as he paced behind his desk. I was just arranging exactly that kind of conversation. Really? That's great. When Sunday evening, 7 o'clock, I'll send you the details. Relief flooded his voice. Thank you, Kara. I know we can work this out. I'm sure we can, I said, and hung up. Through the glass, I watched Mark pump his fist in the air like he'd just scored a touchdown. He thought he'd won something. He thought this dinner would be his chance to smooth things over, to convince me to restore the family harmony he'd spent decades helping to destroy. He was partially right. This dinner would definitely restore something. But it wouldn't be harmony. Sunday evening couldn't come fast enough. I spent Saturday morning in my apartment going through documents I hadn't touched in years. Legal papers stored in a fireproof safe beneath my bed, files that most people would find impossibly boring, but that told the real story of my family's history. The Pennsylvania Trust. Grandpa's final gift to all of us, though only I seem to remember it existed. He'd died when I was 15, and I was the only one who'd sat with him during those final weeks in the hospital. While Mark was busy with high school football, and Clarice was focused on her college applications, I was reading to Grandpa from his favorite financial magazines and listening to his stories about building wealth from nothing. The secret, he'd whispered to me one afternoon, his voice barely audible above the beeping machines, isn't making money. It's knowing when to be patient and when to strike. 3 days before he died, he'd asked me to bring him a pen and paper. "There's something I need to tell you about the trust," he'd said, scribbling notes with shaking hands. "Something the lawyers don't know." What he told me changed everything. The original Pennsylvania Trust had been worth $2.8 million when he died. The family had been told it was worth $800,000, with the bulk going to Mom and smaller portions divided among the 3 kids. But Grandpa had been smarter than that. He'd created 2 trusts, one that the family knew about and one that only he and I knew about. The larger trust had been placed in my name exclusively with instructions that it remain untouched until I turned 25, or until circumstances required its disclosure for the protection of family assets. I'd turned 25 2 years ago. The circumstances had definitely arrived. I pulled the documentation from its manila folder, spreading the papers across my kitchen table. Bank statements, legal filings, investment records, all showing that the missing $2 million from Grandpa's estate had been quietly growing in my name for 8 years. It was now worth $4.1 million, money that Clarice had unknowingly been using as collateral for her real estate investments. Money that had backed Mark's business loans. Money that had been generating income that the family attributed to smart financial planning when it was really just Grandpa's gift to me cycling back to them. They'd been living off my inheritance for years without knowing it. Sunday at 6:30, I dressed carefully. Black dress, simple but expensive. The kind of outfit that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. I pulled my hair back into a low bun and put on the pearl earrings Grandpa had given me for my 16th birthday. Then I gathered the trust documents, slipped them into a leather portfolio, and called an Uber. The Carlton Hotel's private dining room was exactly what I'd requested. Elegant, but not ostentatious, with a round table that seated 8. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and soft lighting created an atmosphere that could feel either intimate or intimidating, depending on the conversation. I arrived 20 minutes early by design. Carmen had arranged everything perfectly. Water glasses filled wine ready, but not yet poured, menus discreetly placed, but dinner already ordered and timed. I'd learned from watching my family that controlling the environment was half the battle. I took my seat facing the door, back straight, hands folded, portfolio beside my plate. At exactly 7 o'clock, Mom walked in first, looking around the room with obvious surprise. She'd dressed up for the occasion, wearing the navy blue dress she saved for special events, her gray hair freshly styled. "Kara, honey," she said, kissing my cheek. "This is lovely. How did you arrange all this?" "I made a call." Mark arrived 2 minutes later with Clarice close behind. They'd clearly coordinated, probably spent the afternoon strategizing about how to handle me. Mark wore his best suit, the one he'd bought for Dad's funeral. Clarice had gone with her power outfit, a charcoal gray ensemble that made her look like she was ready to foreclose on someone's mortgage. They took their seats around the table, leaving 3 empty chairs. Mom sat to my right, Mark to my left, Clarice directly across from me. "Where's everyone else?" Mom asked, glancing at the empty places. This is everyone, I said simply. But you set the table for 8. I wanted to make sure we had enough space. The truth was, I'd wanted them to feel small in a big room the same way I'd felt small in their big family for 23 years. Mark cleared his throat. Kara, I want to start by saying how proud I am of what you've accomplished. Vault 1 is obviously an incredible success, and I had no idea you were involved in something so impressive. You had no idea because you never asked. Fair point, but we're here now and we want to be part of your success. We want to support you. Clarice leaned forward. What Mark is trying to say is that family should stick together, especially when times are good. I opened the portfolio beside my plate and pulled out the first document. You're absolutely right, Clarice. Family should stick together. Which is why I thought it was time we talked about Grandpa's trust. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mom's fork paused halfway to her mouth. What about the trust? Well, I said, smoothing the papers in front of me, I've been reviewing the financial records and I discovered some interesting discrepancies. Mark and Clarice exchanged glances. What kind of discrepancies? Clarice asked carefully. I smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile, the kind that explained where my money really came from. I placed the first document on the table, turning it so they could all see. This is Grandpa's original will filed with the Pennsylvania Probate Court on March 15, 2016. It clearly states that the family trust contained $2.8 million to be divided among his heirs. Mom leaned forward, squinting at the legal text. But we were told it was only $800,000. You were told that because this document was replaced. I placed a second paper next to the first. This is the amended will that was presented to the family lawyer. Notice the date change and the altered asset values. Clarice grabbed the paper, scanning it quickly. This is impossible. You can't just forge legal documents. You're right. You can't, but you can have them legally modified if you have power of attorney and medical documentation showing mental incapacity. I pulled out a third document, a medical report with Grandpa's name at the top. Dr. Harrison's assessment of Grandpa's mental state during his final month. According to this report, he was suffering from severe dementia and was no longer capable of making financial decisions. Mark frowned. But Grandpa was sharp as a tack until the end. We all know that. We do know that, but Dr. Harrison didn't, because Dr. Harrison never actually examined Grandpa. This medical report was falsified using Grandpa's medical records from a different doctor. I watched their faces as the implications sank in. Someone had to forge these documents, I continued. Someone with access to Grandpa's medical information and legal representation. Someone who stood to benefit from reducing the apparent value of the trust. Clarice's face had gone pale. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. I pulled out a bank statement. This shows the real trust account, the one Grandpa told me about before he died. $4.1 million, currently managed by Vault 1 Financial on my behalf. Your behalf? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Grandpa left the primary trust to me. He told me 3 days before he died that he was worried about family dynamics, about the way Mark and Clarice treated me. He wanted to make sure I had the resources to build my own life, independent of family politics. Mark was shaking his head. This is crazy. Why wouldn't he tell us? Because he knew what would happen. The same thing that's happening right now. I pulled out the final set of documents. Bank transfer records, real estate purchase agreements, business loan applications. Over the past 8 years, someone has been using the trust as collateral for personal investments. Real estate purchases in Philadelphia and Harrisburg. Business loans for property development. Even the down payment on Mark's house came from trust funds. Clarice stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I've heard enough of this. You can't just waltz in here with a bunch of papers and accuse us of fraud. I'm not accusing anyone of fraud, Clarice. I'm accusing you specifically. I spread out the real estate documents like playing cards. Meridian Properties, LLC. Registered to your name in 2017. Initial investment of $1.4 million sourced from the Pennsylvania Trust account. Properties purchased in university districts converted to student housing, generating approximately $200,000 in annual rental income. Mom looked at Clarice with shock. You told me that money came from your settlement with David. It did, Clarice said quickly. The divorce settlement. This is all coincidence. The divorce settlement was for $300,000. I said, pulling out yet another document. I have the court records. The money from Meridian Properties came from Grandpa's trust accessed using forged power of attorney documents that you filed 6 months after his death. Mark was staring at his sister like he'd never seen her before. Clarice, tell me this isn't true. Of course it's not true. Kara's obviously having some kind of breakdown. All this stress from her little computer company. My little computer company, I interrupted, has been unknowingly financing your real estate empire for 4 years. Every time you needed additional capital, you used my trust account as collateral. The bank approved your loans because they thought you had family backing worth millions. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Here's what really happened. When Grandpa died, you realized that with me getting even a small portion of the inheritance, I might become financially independent. Independent enough to leave Pittsburgh, maybe even successful enough to expose the family dynamics that you'd all worked so hard to maintain. I turned back to face them. So, you forged the medical documents, filed fraudulent power of attorney papers, and convinced Mom that the trust was smaller than it actually was. You pocketed the difference and used it to build a real estate portfolio that's now worth approximately $6 million. Clarice was shaking with rage. You can't prove any of this. I don't have to prove it. I've already reported it. The room went silent. Yesterday morning, before I went to Mark's bank, I filed a complaint with the Pennsylvania State Attorney General's office. Financial fraud, elder abuse, and forgery. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit will be opening an investigation within the week. Mom had gone completely pale. She looked between her children like she was watching a tennis match where both players were losing. But there's good news, I continued. I'm prepared to withdraw the complaint. Hope flickered in Mark's eyes. What do you want? Nothing, I said. I don't want anything from any of you. I just want you to understand what silence costs. I gathered my documents and put them back in the portfolio. For 23 years, you all chose silence when I was treated like an outsider. When my achievements were ignored, when my needs were dismissed, when I was forgotten at holidays, and excluded from family decisions. You all saw it happening, and you all chose silence. I looked at each of them in turn. So now you get to experience what silence feels like when it's working against you, instead of for you. I walked toward the door, then paused. The complaint stays on file. Whether it moves forward depends entirely on how you choose to handle the next phase of our family relationship. What does that mean? Mom asked, her voice breaking. It means you all have some thinking to do. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, leaving them sitting in stunned silence around a dinner table that suddenly felt much too large for the 3 people remaining. Monday morning, I didn't go to the bookstore. Instead, I took the elevator to the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower in downtown Pittsburgh, Vault 1's headquarters. Yes, we'd had an office building for 3 years. No, my family had never thought to Google my company's address. The boardroom was exactly as I'd designed it. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a conference table that could seat 20, and screens that could display financial data from markets around the world. It was everything I dreamed of when I was coding in my studio apartment, eating ramen, and pretending I wasn't ambitious. Carmen was already there with the legal team, 3 attorneys from Pittsburgh's most prestigious law firm. Documents spread across the mahogany table like a paper battlefield. Everything's ready, Carmen said, as I took my seat at the head of the table. The trust transfer papers, the foundation bylaws, and the board appointment letters. I nodded, signing my name on the first set of documents. With each signature, I was transferring ownership of Grandpa's Pennsylvania Trust from the Meridian family estate to the Vault One Foundation. $4.1 million that would now fund scholarships, mentorship programs, and small business loans for people who'd been told they weren't worth investing in. People like me? The lead attorney, Margaret Chen, slid the final document across the table. "This completes the transfer," she said. "The foundation is now the sole beneficiary of the Pennsylvania Trust assets. The previous collateral agreements are null and void." Which meant that Clarice's real estate empire, built on loans secured by my inheritance, was about to collapse. I was signing the last page when Carmen's phone buzzed. "Ms. Meridian," she said quietly. "Security is calling from the lobby. Your sister is here demanding to see you." "Send her up." "Are you sure she seems agitated?" "I'm sure." 5 minutes later, Clarice burst through the boardroom doors like a hurricane making landfall. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and she was clutching a manila envelope in her shaking hands. She stopped short when she saw the legal team, the documents, the obvious formality of what was happening. "What is this?" she demanded. "A board meeting," I said calmly. "Please have a seat." "I don't want to sit down. I want to know what the hell you've done." She threw the envelope onto the table. Papers spilled out. Letters with bank letterheads. Legal notices, loan default warnings. "They're calling in my loans," she said, her voice cracking. "All of them. At once. They're saying the collateral is no longer valid." I glanced at the papers without touching them. "That's unfortunate." "Unfortunate, Kara. They're taking everything. The properties, the rental income, even my house. Everything I've built over the past 8 years." "Everything you built with my money?" "It was family money." "No," I said, standing up slowly. "It was my money, specifically left to me by a grandfather who understood family dynamics better than any of us realized." Clarice looked around the boardroom, taking in the expensive furniture, the city view, the obvious success that surrounded me. "How long?" she whispered. How long have you been planning this? This company, this building, this revenge?" 7 years, I said. "But it was never about revenge." I walked to the window, looking down at the streets where I'd walked as a child, invisible and unimportant. It was about building something that couldn't be taken away. Something that couldn't be dismissed or forgotten or pushed to the basement. "You're destroying our family." I turned back to face her. "I'm not destroying anything, Clarice. I'm just letting the truth have consequences." She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in dark rivers. "Please, I know I made mistakes, but I can fix this. We can work something out. Family helps family, right? You're absolutely right. Family should help family." Hope flickered in her eyes. That's why the Foundation's first initiative will be providing legal defense funds for families dealing with financial fraud cases. People who've been taken advantage of by relatives who've had their inheritances stolen, who've been gaslit into thinking they don't deserve better. The hope died. The second initiative will be funding financial literacy programs, so people can recognize when they're being manipulated by the people who claim to love them. Clarice sank into a chair, her fight completely gone. "What about Mom? She didn't know about any of this." "Mom knew enough. She knew I was being treated differently, and she chose to let it happen. She knew you were making real estate investments that didn't match your divorce settlement, and she chose not to ask questions." I sat back down, facing my sister across the mahogany table. "But here's what's going to happen. The foundation will provide Mom with a comfortable living allowance for the rest of her life. She'll never want for anything essential. Mark will receive career counseling and job placement assistance when First National inevitably lets him go. And me? You'll receive exactly what you gave me for 23 years, which is the opportunity to figure it out on your own." Clarice stood up slowly, gathering the scattered papers from the table. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice bitter. "I hope this is everything you wanted." "What I wanted," I said, "was a family that saw me as more than an afterthought. What I got was the motivation to build something better. She walked toward the door, then stopped. You think you've won something, but all you've really done is prove that you're just as cold and calculating as you think we are. I considered that for a moment. Maybe you're right, but there's one important difference. What's that? I didn't destroy you, Clarice. I just let the truth in. She left without another word, and the boardroom fell silent except for the quiet hum of the city, 42 floors below. Carmen looked at me across the table. How do you feel? I thought about it for a long moment, surprised to realize I didn't feel triumphant, or vindicated, or satisfied. I felt tired, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt free. That evening, I found the letter slipped under my apartment door. Handwritten on Mom's old stationery, the kind with small blue flowers around the border that she'd bought for special occasions. The paper was slightly wrinkled as if it had been crumpled and smoothed out several times before being delivered. My dearest Kara, it began in Mom's careful cursive. I don't know where to start, except to say that I'm sorry. Not just for the past few days, but for years of looking the other way when I should have spoken up. For allowing you to feel invisible in your own family. For convincing myself that your independence meant you didn't need the same love and attention that I gave your siblings. I sat on my Murphy bed, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. After you left to dinner on Sunday, Mark and Clarice spent 3 hours trying to explain what had happened. But the more they talked, the clearer it became that this wasn't about money or inheritance, or even Clarice's poor decisions. This was about 23 years of small moments where I failed you. The letter continued for 2 pages, Mom's handwriting growing smaller and more rushed as she went on. I remember when you were 8 and you won the science fair, but we missed the ceremony because Mark had a football game. I remember when you got into Penn State and instead of celebrating, we talked about why it wasn't practical. I remember every Christmas where you seemed to fade into the background, and I told myself that was just your personality. My throat tightened. I don't expect forgiveness, sweetheart. I don't even think I deserve it. But I want you to know that I see you now. I see what you've built, not just the company and the success, but the person you've become despite us, not because of us. The letter ended with a line that made me close my eyes and breathe deeply. Break the cycle, Kara. Be the parent to the next generation that we failed to be to you. And if you can find it in your heart, teach us how to do better. I folded the letter carefully and set it on my bedside table. Then I walked to my closet and pulled out the small metal box I kept on the top shelf, behind winter coats I rarely wore. Inside the box were things I'd saved from childhood. Report cards, a few photographs, and the savings passbook from my first bank account opened when I was 7 years old with a $5 birthday gift from Grandpa. I hadn't looked at the passbook in years, but something made me open it now. The pages were yellowed, filled with tiny deposits and withdrawals from my elementary school years. $5 here, $10 there. The careful record-keeping of a child who'd learned early that money meant independence. But on the very last page in handwriting I recognized, but hadn't seen in years, was a note I'd somehow missed all these years. In Grandpa's careful script, use this when they forget who you are. I stared at the words, feeling something shift inside my chest. Not anger or sadness or vindication, but something quieter and more profound. Understanding. Grandpa hadn't left me the trust fund as an inheritance. He'd left it as a tool, a way to reveal truth when truth needed revealing, a way to force conversations that had been avoided for too long. I thought about Clarice probably sitting in her empty house, tonight forced to confront the consequences of choices she'd made in secrecy. About Mark wondering if his career could survive the revelation that his sister was everything he'd pretended to be. About Mom writing a letter that probably took her hours to compose. For the first time since this all began, I felt something I hadn't expected. Sadness. Not for myself, but for them. For the family we could have been if we'd learned to see each other clearly years ago. For the relationships that might have grown from honesty instead of assumptions. I closed the passbook and put it back in the box, but I kept Grandpa's note, placing it next to Mom's letter on my bedside table. Two pieces of paper, one representing the past I'd inherited, one representing the future I might choose to build. Tomorrow I would call Elena and tell her that Sophia's college was completely paid for. I would finalize the foundation paperwork and start building something that mattered. I would begin the work of becoming the person Grandpa believed I could be. But tonight, I sat in my studio apartment above the bakery, listening to the quiet sounds of a city settling into sleep, and allowed myself to grieve for the family that never was. And slowly, carefully, I began to imagine what healing might look like. 3 months later, I stood in front of a building I'd never imagined I'd own. The Vault One Foundation for Women in Finance occupied the entire third floor of a renovated warehouse in Pittsburgh's Strip District. Exposed brick walls, high ceilings, and huge windows that flooded the space with natural light. It was everything a corporate office wasn't supposed to be: warm, welcoming, and completely unpretentious. The logo glowed softly above the entrance, a simple design featuring interlocking circles that represented connection support and infinite possibility. Beneath it, in clean modern lettering, building financial freedom through community. I pushed through the glass doors and walked into what felt like controlled chaos. Women of all ages clustered around workstations, some in business suits, others in jeans and sweaters. The soft hum of conversation mixed with keyboard clicks and the occasional burst of laughter. This was opening day. Carmen met me near the reception desk, tablet in hand, and that efficient smile that meant everything was running exactly on schedule. "How are we looking?" I asked. 67 participants registered for today's workshops. The mentorship matching program has a waiting list of over 200, and the scholarship applications are coming in faster than we can process them. I nodded, walking through the main workspace. 6 months ago, this had been an empty shell. Now it was filled with ergonomic desks, state-of-the-art computers, and the kind of collaborative energy I'd dreamed of when I was coding alone in my studio apartment. The first round of microloans was distributed yesterday, Carmen continued. 15 women received funding to start or expand their businesses. The average loan amount was $12,000. $12,000, not enough to buy a luxury car, but enough to change a life. We stopped at a workstation near the windows, where a familiar figure sat hunched over a laptop, completely absorbed in whatever was on the screen. Elena. She'd been the foundation's first hire, not as a charity case, but as our director of community outreach. It turned out that someone who'd spent years navigating financial hardship while raising a daughter and working multiple jobs had exactly the kind of practical wisdom our participants needed. "Elena," I said softly. She looked up, her face breaking into the same warm smile that had made her soup taste like love when I was sick. "Kara, look at this place. I still can't believe this is real." "How's Sophia doing at Columbia?" Elena's smile grew even brighter. "Dean's List last semester. She's majoring in economics now, says she wants to work in financial policy. She wants to make sure other kids don't have to choose between college and groceries." "Sounds like she has a good role model." "We both do," Elena said, squeezing my hand. "This foundation isn't just changing lives, Kara. It's changing how people think about what's possible." I looked around the workspace again, watching women teach each other Excel shortcuts, discuss business plans, and share the kind of knowledge that had always been gatekept by people who looked nothing like them. "Ms. Meridian," a young voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see a girl who couldn't have been more than 19, holding a thick folder and looking nervous. "I'm Jessica. I just wanted to say thank you. The scholarship I received is going to cover my last 2 years at Carnegie Mellon. Computer science, with a focus on fintech development." She paused, fidgeting with the folder. "I know you probably hear this a lot, but my family didn't think college was realistic for someone like me. They meant well, but they just didn't understand that things could be different." I felt something familiar stir in my chest. Not pain this time, but recognition. "What are you working on?" I asked, nodding toward her folder. "An app that helps people with limited credit history access small business loans. It uses alternative data sources to assess risk instead of traditional credit scores. That sounds innovative. It's still just an idea, but I think it could help people like my mom. She's always wanted to open her own restaurant, but the banks won't even talk to her. I thought about the 7-year-old girl who'd opened her first savings account with $5 from her grandfather. About the 21-year-old who'd been told that banking wasn't about coding. About the 23-year-old who'd been called broke while sitting on millions. Would you like to present your idea to our investment committee next week? I asked. Jessica's eyes went wide. Really? You think it's good enough? I think it's exactly the kind of innovation this industry needs. And I think you're exactly the kind of person who should be building it. As Jessica walked away, practically glowing with excitement, Carmen appeared at my elbow again. There's someone here to see you. She's waiting in your office. Who is it? She said she's your mother. I felt my stomach tighten, but not with the old familiar dread, with something more complex. Anticipation mixed with caution, hope tempered by experience. Tell her I'll be there in 5 minutes. I took one more look around the foundation space, at the women building futures they'd been told were impossible, at Elena helping someone navigate a loan application, at Jessica probably already sketching out improvements to her app idea. This was what I'd built from silence. Not revenge or vindication, but possibility. And for the first time since this journey began, I felt ready for whatever conversation was waiting in my office. The conversation with Mom lasted exactly 47 minutes. No raised voices, no tears, no dramatic reconciliation scene that would tie everything up with a neat bow. Just two women sitting across from each other, finally speaking the same language truth. She apologized. I listened. She asked if we could try again. I said maybe with boundaries and time and a lot of work on both sides. It wasn't the ending either of us had imagined, but it was honest. And after 23 years of performance, honesty felt revolutionary. Now I was sitting on a bench in Frick Park watching the late afternoon sun filter through oak trees that had been growing longer than my family had been disappointing each other. My phone was on silent. The foundation would run perfectly without me for an hour. I'd learned something important in these past few months. Success wasn't about proving I was worthy of love or respect or recognition. Success was about building something so solid that other people's opinions became irrelevant. Silence had taught me that. For years I'd been invisible, overlooked, dismissed. But silence isn't emptiness. Silence is space where real work gets done, where ideas grow, where strength builds without announcement or applause. I'd spent 7 years in that silence writing code while my family slept, building algorithms while they built assumptions about who I was supposed to be. Every ignored accomplishment, every dismissive comment, every family gathering where I felt like a stranger had made compound interest on my determination. Silence earns interest too, and mine had been compounding for a very long time. A small sparrow landed on the far end of my bench, hopping closer in the cautious way birds do when they're not quite sure if you're safe. I sat still, letting it approach at its own pace. "Hey there," I said softly. The bird tilted its head, studying me with one bright black eye. Then, apparently deciding I wasn't a threat, it settled down about 2 feet away, preening its feathers in the warm sunlight. I thought about Elena's daughter, Sophia, probably studying for finals at Columbia right now, building the foundation for a career that would help other families navigate financial systems designed to exclude them. I thought about Jessica working late in her dorm room, coding an app that could revolutionize how people access capital. I thought about the 67 women who'd walked through our doors today, each carrying dreams that someone had told them were unrealistic. I thought about my grandfather, who'd understood that the most powerful gifts are the ones that reveal themselves slowly, in the right moment when truth needs backup. My phone buzzed with a text. Carmen, probably with tomorrow's schedule, or a question about next week's board meeting. I glanced at it without picking it up. It was from Mark. "Proud of you, little sister?" I read it twice, then set the phone down again. The sparrow hopped a little closer now, just inches from my hand. We sat together in comfortable silence, two small creatures who'd learned that sometimes the safest place is right out in the open, where everyone can see you, but no one thinks to look. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting everything golden. Soon, I'd get up and walk back to my car drive to my apartment above the bakery that I kept, because I like the smell of sourdough and the reminder of where I'd started. Tomorrow, I'd continue building something that mattered, not to prove anything to anyone, but because I could. Because silence had taught me that the most revolutionary thing you can do is become exactly who you were meant to be, regardless of who's paying attention. The sparrow took flight, circling once before disappearing into the canopy above. I sat a little longer in the golden light, listening to the quiet, grateful for everything it had taught me. Then, I stood up, brushed off my jeans, and walked toward whatever came next. Sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who need to learn the hardest lessons. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, drop a comment below and share your experience. And if you want more stories about people who turn their pain into power, hit that subscribe button and the bell icon. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.